Welcome to the Student Success Podcast. If you work in higher ed and want to learn ways to support students, check out today's episode. Welcome, Dr. Kevin Walthers, president of Allan Hancock College.
It's good to be here, Dr. Al Solano.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm originally from Texas. I grew up as an Air Force kid. We moved around a lot. And, a million years ago, I was working on my doctorate in higher ed, in education leadership and policy when thinking I was going to be a K-12 superintendent or high school principal, something like that. That was my career choice. I'm a first-generation college student, and so for my generation, that first-generation college student, their goal was to be high school teachers, right? Those were the kind of professionals I was exposed to. So I thought, someday maybe I'll be a principal. And as I was finishing up my coursework, had this great opportunity to go work for the Utah State Legislature and worked on higher ed policy for about 7 years and found my way working over to the Utah State Board of Regents and then ultimately the College of Eastern Utah. They're in Utah, in Price, Utah, and kind of headed off on a higher ed journey, and it's been great. It's a lot of fun. I've served as a senior official in the Utah system, as the chief administrative officer for both of West Virginia's systems, and now I'm in my second presidency, 13 years at Allan Hancock College, 15 total, and just really love the work we're doing.
Well, thank you for that. So recently you've been highlighted by the American Association of Community Colleges. They have a publication, the Community College Daily, and that's been passed around quite a bit. A lot of people have been sharing that, and it's regarding student data. So take us through a journey of how you got to that place.
Well, 2 Novembers ago, so November 24, I was at an ACC meeting, and of all places, the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank was doing this presentation about how they've been evaluating success rates for their local colleges, and their stance was, look, IPEDS doesn't do justice to community colleges. I mean, IPEDS was built for the kind of students who went to college in the 1960s, which were middle class, white, predominantly male, and they were going full time. That was not that's not our student body, right? And so they came up with this new model, and they were doing all of the colleges in their region, and that includes South Carolina primarily. And they were talking about, look, we should give you credit for students who graduate. We should give you credit for students who transfer. We should give you credit for students that get a credential and students that get that are still there. Even if they're still there, we're going to count that as a type of success. And they said, instead of monitoring it along the way, we're just going to do it. We're going to take a snapshot. In the fall, we're going to count all of your first-time students, no matter where they came from, right? Even if they had been to another institution and came to the college, what happened to that student 4 years later? And I thought about that, and I'm like, yeah, we can do that at Hancock. There's no reason we can't recreate that exact same template and share it with our faculty and staff to talk about the work we're doing. And so we rolled it out January of 25, the first draft of it, and then we were able to talk a little bit more about it this past convocation for the fall of the 25-26 year. And it shows that we have some good outcomes. It also shows we've got room for improvement. So we're really excited about using this tool to reflect the kind of work we're doing with our student body.
So what's an example of how IPEDS had counted, for example, student completion, what that number is or was compared to what the Richmond Fed number looks like?
So I'm a good example of what's wrong with the IPEDS system. I went to Eastfield College right out of high school, and I went there for 1 year, and IPEDS only counts if you get a degree, right? And you have to do it within 3 years. So I got 30 units transferred to the University of Texas at Austin. And so in the data for Eastfield College, I show up as a failure because I didn't graduate there. And then at the University of Texas, where I did graduate, I don't show up at all because I wasn't a first-time full-time freshman at the University of Texas. So there's no way to count that, and IPEDS doesn't account for transfer. So if we were looking at how, this model that the Richmond Fed came up with, I would count as a success for Eastfield because I show up at the University of Texas in my second year as a transfer student. So that would be a success. And I think that's the most important part, is that having, when you rely on your entire cohort being first-time, full-time freshmen, the difference in the number of students you're counting is, for us, we'll have something around 300 students in that cohort of first-time, full-time freshmen, compared to all first-time students who show up on our campus will be 12 to 1,500 students. So we're counting a much bigger cohort. So that means when we're saying that our outcomes are better on the new cohort, it's not just better cohort to cohort, it's better for a larger number of students.
And how are your colleagues responding to this?
My colleagues on campus have been very interested in this. I think it sparked some conversations around campus because now you can start to ask questions about, what am I doing in my classroom to improve retention? What am I doing to ensure students finish my class and don't stop out during the semester? So that's been a good conversation, and we're really new at that. I guess this is really the first full year we've been talking about it. So I think the other side of it, what I think the most exciting piece of that data, our success rate is 41%. If you take that of students that transferred, students that got a degree, students that are still there, students that got a certificate, 41% of those students, keeping in mind that some of those students had no intention of pursuing a degree, but they were there for the first time. So 41%, that's way better than the IPEDS number that's down in the 20% range. Mm-hmm. But it also shows we can improve. Mm-hmm. But where I like to compare it to is when you look at if a student during that 4 years just goes full-time one semester, for the students that went full-time one semester, the success rate jumps to 54%. And I mean, that's huge. That's a 25% gain in the outcome rate that, all of a sudden we're talking about more than half the students having a successful outcome 4 years later. And that's something then we can talk to our faculty and talk to our counselors and say, look, if we can encourage students to go full time, we know time is the enemy. So let's help these students get through their path more quickly. And I think that's been a really eye-opening statistic for our campus.
Yeah, at any given campus, at least the ones I work with, part-time students can be 85% of the population. And so one of the ways we've been trying to address that is through a unit accumulation campaign, so that we're not saying out the gate, you better come here full-time, although, I mean, that would be ideal for them to be there full-time, but rather, hey, so you're taking 6 units, you know what? Consider taking 9. You're taking 9, consider taking 12, and here's why. And then let students decide, right? So is that kind of your next step as you look at this data and that one data point about one full-time enrollment at a semester that makes such a big difference? What's kind of your next step to given that data point?
Well, I think so. For us, we're the bulk of our new students are coming from the local high schools. We're a fairly isolated campus. The nearest community college to us is 45 minutes away. The nearest university is at best 45 minutes away, and in tens of thousands of dollars away. And the next closest is 60 miles away. So we're the only game in town. Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure we're excellent for our community. But with those high schools coming in, our feeling is They were going full time. Back in May, you can keep going full time, and we incentivize that by providing Promise scholarships. So we have a 2-year Promise program that will pay for tuition for students for 2 years, but they have to attend the major semesters full time. That's the commitment those students need to make is to attend full time, to take math and English so that they can proceed on the way to success, because we know those are the things that build success. This is another tool. One other tool that I'm really excited about that's related to this but wasn't inspired by this is we've automated student education plans. So every one of those freshmen who come in, they get their student education plan automatically handed to them. They're welcome to change it, but we know that students who have education plans are more likely to complete, and we know that they use those plans to map out their courses. So we want to put students in the best place to be successful, and if they want to opt out of that, we have ways for them to do that. But we want the default to be what's the best for the most students, and we think that's a really positive way of getting students to stay enrolled and to complete. And we're seeing it. We're seeing our completion numbers increase since the Promise program began, even though our student enrollment is lower than when the Student Promise program began.
So a few things that's sparking a lot of thought here. One thing I wanted to ask then, as you know, the country's moving more and more into performance-based formulas for funding. Texas, California. So, for example, you're in California. We're both in California. Given the student-centered formula, does that use IPEDS, or does it use something more akin to what you've been talking about?
Well, I think it's not using rates, and I think that's important. One of the things that I think is really important is, I've never had an employer ask me for a graduation rate. They ask me for a graduate, right? That's what we want. We want graduates. And the student-centered funding formula rewards colleges for these positive outcomes. We get funding for every student that transfers, for every student that graduates, for every student that gets a certificate. You only get one per year. You can't stack those up. But it's important to us that we tie those good outcomes that we've been talking with students about. If we focus on doing the right thing for students, the money will take care of itself. And but that means we need to be intentional about what those things are. So we're not pressuring students finish. We need the money, but we want to set up our college in a way that encourages and incentivizes students to complete, because that's what's best for them in the long term. And on the back end of that, we feel like our funding will be fine as we do that.
Tell us a little bit more, because campuses are trying to figure this out, right? The research is clear on this, especially for students of color, if we can get them a comprehensive ed plan, right? And,
right.
Not just an ed plan, a simple one, but a comprehensive one. How do you manage to do that at your campus? Is it, I've seen systems where it's done through technology and then they're able to meet with someone to help them with that. How does that look like at Allan Hancock?
Well, what we're doing now is that, and this just started this year.
Okay.
I mean, literally this semester we started this, but we've programmed our student information system so that when the student signs up and they say, I want to be an engineering major or a welding major, the system generates an ed plan for them and gives them the information they need and encourages them to go visit with a counselor. But they've now got that ed plan in their hands, in their degree work system online. They can follow that along the way so that what we're trying to do, for so many of our kids, they are, they're first generation high school students, right? I mean, it's crazy to think that in our community, 40% of the adults in our largest city, Santa Maria, don't have a high school diploma. Think about that. They're farm workers, they're laborers, and they are very hardworking families, and they want their kids to go to college, but they don't have the tools they need to help guide their kids through college. So if we can set that up for the student, the things that you and I did for our kids to say, make sure you've got your ed plan, that will help those students be more successful. And so I'm really confident that we're going to see even more success now that every student has an ed plan, because we had counselors, trying to do ed plans, trying to get students to come in, and students are busy. So and they don't really do optional, right? Our community college students don't do optional. So if you say you should do this, they're not going to do it. But if here it is, you've got this. If you want to change it, go see your counselor, and we can get you into a different ed plan if that's what you want to do.
And how is it auto-generated? So on the back end, you had people. So I want to go into welding, and so that comprehensive ed plan is already in the back end, and it just spits it out for a student.
Yeah, it's like layered on top of our pathways programs, right? We've laid out all of these guided pathways programs for all of our programs, and then we use a program called DegreeWorks that lets students do scenario building. So all of that database working together is able to generate the ed plan. Now, the caveat, I'm a college president, so I don't actually do anything. So we have some really smart people who take care of all that on the back end, and I just count on them to make sure that that's working, and they put a lot of work into it and have done a really nice job with it.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Being a college president, you said you're in your 15th year, and at Santa Maria, it's 13, is it?
13 at the same college. That's correct.
Right, and while you've been college president, how has we started talking about data. How has the data look like? How has it been trending? And what are some of the things that contribute to that, whether good or bad?
When I got to Hancock, we were coming out of the recession, and this is a good college and doing good work. I was able to take some of my lessons learned, especially in West Virginia. We had a really good institutional research shop and did a lot of good work for Complete College America and for the National Governors Association. And I was able to take some of that experience and bring it in. And one of the things that we learned in that process was completion's the goal. And we would report. One of the cool things about community colleges, I'll throw my proud dad moment in there. My kid's going to graduate this spring from our college. He's getting 5 degrees. He's getting a degree in engineering. He's going to get one in physics. He's going to get one in chemistry, and I think math with physics, right? I couldn't even pass the basic courses for those, but that's it's super cool, right? He's going to get these 5 degrees, but those 5 degrees don't make him more marketable, right? It doesn't. It's neat that he's got that, but really he's one graduate for our college. But our college was counting when they would do the press release. We're going to be issuing, 1,800 degrees this spring at graduation, and the community go, "Oh, that's fantastic." And I'm like, 1,800 degrees? We're not that big of a college. Well, then I figured out the students are all layering these degrees together. I'm like, well, how many unique individuals is that? Well, it turns out it was around 800, like 815 total. I said, that's the number we need to talk about. We need to talk about the 815, which is still a good number for a college our size, but let's make sure we're being realistic about how many students we're turning out. And so we really started focusing on completion throughout the student journey, completion of individual courseworks, completion of semesters, completion of whatever credential they could get along the way, and then finally graduation, getting that degree earned at the end. And we've seen a shift in our culture where people are really focused on how many graduates can we have. And one of the really cool things is when we started looking at this 12, 13 years ago, in a community that's 65 to 70% Latino, our graduating class was still majority white. And we're like, and that's our graduating class should look like our student body, and our student body should look like our community, which it did. And so we started working on that. We started working on, we started using the student equity funds to identify what are the programs we need to help students complete. And one of my favorite things to talk about now is in 3 of the last 5 years, the number of Latino graduates that we had at Allan Hancock College is larger than the total number of graduates we had that first year. And that's, we're setting records for the number of students graduating, but we've made our graduating class look like our student body. And that was a lot of heavy lifting, and it doesn't happen overnight. But that's how you transform a community like ours, where we're the only game in town, making sure that students are leaving with a valuable credential.
Yeah, and obviously it's really important to have a strong bench, right? The team, but the coach still has a role to play in that. And since you've been a college president for 15 years, what are kind of some, maybe I'll frame it like this. Let's say there's someone up and coming, they want to be a college president. What are some lessons learned, some tips that you can give that person?
I think somebody who's looking at this career path, make sure you know how to do the job you just came from really well. Right. We seem to have some folks who are on a fast track and they're trying to, they got to be a dean, and 2 or 3 years later they're applying for VP jobs, and then 2 years later, there's a lot. There's a lot that these jobs entail that there's no book going to teach it. You're going to have to make some mistakes. You're going to have to learn the hard way. You're going to get some successes that you can remember and bring forward. What I hope I'm able to do, I've had some people that work for me that have gone on to promotion jobs to college presidents, and hopefully we gave them the space to make mistakes and the space to innovate. I feel like we've done that. But the real key, this is probably more a message for trustees, is longevity matters. Longevity matters. And I'm at a point, I'm going to have a dean retire this year, and I will be down to one manager on our team that I didn't hire. And my joke with the management team is that means I don't have anybody left to blame, right? It's all on me. But we've built this team of people that view student success as a priority. That view every question we answer is, how does it help a student? How does it help a student? And it's such a different mindset from what you see at a 4-year university, where there's lots of protection of the institution, and they want to, we don't want to get sued if we give a special arrangement to one student and not another. We take, we set everything up for as many students as possible, but we're going to take those individual students and hold them by the hand and get them through the process that need it. So I think longevity is so critical in these kind of roles. And when you see colleges that have lots of turnover, you're also going to see colleges that are not really doing all they can. One other thing I would say about that is the core of what we do, the core of our faculty and staff and administrators is so strong that even when colleges are messing up, we still have this core of really good outcomes. We have students graduate, we have students transfer. But what happens is when there's lots of turnover and there's lots of tumult, the students on the margins are the ones who get hurt the most. And those are the students we need to help the most, is the students on the margins.
Yeah, I'm big on culture, as you know, and centering a kind of culture of dignity and kindness where you can make mistakes and you can experiment. And if it doesn't go well the first time, well, okay, what happened? Let's learn from it and move forward, right? Unfortunately, that's not the norm. And to your point, there are spaces where, for example, Board of Trustees would not like the experiment, the learning, and you're out of here because, it didn't go well. And so it's really important because our institutions are places of learning for students, that they also be places of learning for those who serve them, right? Just creating that space for learning. And, it's obvious to me that you've done that, and it's evident in the data, in the numbers. And I visited your campus several times, and it's evident in the culture. The other thing I think presidents do is they're able to fight, for their students, be out there. And I remember reading that you were really trying to address this equity issue, given the fact that you are kind of isolated, right? You have San Luis Obispo, but it's not easy to get in, and it's not like they take thousands of students, transfer students. And then UC Santa Barbara, not a lot of people in your community want to move, right? They still want to be with their families, and you really fought for community colleges to be able to offer bachelor's degrees. So tell us a little bit about that.
It's I think it's important. Even with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, 45 minutes up the road. When you think about our students, that's 90 miles a day round trip. Even before gas prices spiked, that was expensive. Plus a parking pass, plus, right? Plus you're not getting that full experience. You're not being able to stay for the later study groups. You might have to get home for work. So even that commute, if Cal Poly had enough seats for all of our students, would be very difficult. Mm-hmm. We needed some bachelor's degrees in our community. And I think, I spent 2.5, 3 years, really taking on CSU over their intransigence about offering these degrees for our community. And that's where I get passionate, is when I start talking about our students and our community. I get super passionate about that. And we spend a lot of time making the argument we should be able to offer bachelor's degrees if the CSU is not going to do that. And CSU spent a lot of time pushing back on that. We got every politician in our region, every business in our region was supporting us. All the chambers of commerce were supporting us. And ultimately, we had a legislator. We got the board of governors approved our what we were calling a bachelor's of applied business, and then it goes into this negotiating rule with the CSU, which is completely set up in a way that CSU essentially has veto power over it. And it's supposed to be, we're going to have faculty to faculty conversations and and I know you're kind of a sci-fi geek. I'm not really a sci-fi geek, but I love the original Star Trek. And I went into those meetings treating it like, the old Captain Kirk and the Kobayashi Maru. If you have something that's not fair, we're going to change the rules to make it fair. Uh-huh. And that fight went on for months until our local assembly member, Greg Hart, got involved and filed a piece of legislation for us that said, for Hancock College, if it's approved by the Board of Governors, it's approved. And just took us out of that process. And CSU woke up. They were like, oh, wait a minute, it sounds like somebody's serious about this. I'm not sure that piece of legislation really had a chance of passing, but I also think CSU didn't want to have that public debate in a hearing. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, I'm getting a call from Jeff Armstrong, president of Cal Poly, offering to provide 4 degrees, Cal Poly degrees at our campus, which is what we'd wanted all along. And to Jeff's credit, he could have just offered 1. But he took the opportunity to say, no, we're going to offer 4 degrees in northern Santa Barbara County. So now we're on this path. We've got 1 in sociology. We're starting another one in business this fall. In the fall of 28, we'll start a 3rd one. And in the fall of 2030, we'll start a 4th one. Those are going to be real live Cal Poly degrees, taught by Cal Poly faculty with a Cal Poly diploma at the end. And as much as I value what we do and as much as our faculty and staff do great work, a Cal Poly degree is a name brand degree that you can take anywhere in the country and lay it on a desk and say, I'm ready to work. And so that's going to be transformational for our community to be able to have that kind of quality on our campus. And we can do what we do best. Cal Poly can do what they do best, and students are going to be the beneficiary of that. And our local businesses, right? I mean, we need a pathway for students to be able to, go and get that business degree and go to work for the local. We have some very large agriculture firms that need business majors. We have city and county government and banks and all those kind of things where those students will be welcomed with open arms to come in and get jobs that will allow them to continue living on the Central Coast.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. As we start to wrap up, I'm wondering your take on AI, right? AI is just really changing the landscape in the workforce, in education, and it's moving so fast. Where are you in that? Because it's changing all the time. What you may say now may change in a week or two, but given today, what's your take on AI?
I think I read a really good article written by a guy named Martin Mell. He's a professor or an instructor professor. I'm not sure what they call him at Cal Poly. But he talked about how, there are stages of learning where you don't know what you don't know, and you learn those things, and then you practice them, and then you learn to analyze them. And then ultimately you're a master of some kind of information or some kind of data. And his point was AI removes those first three steps. Mm-hmm. And what we need to be doing in the classroom is teaching students how to use that tool so that when they get an answer, when they if you're asking a student to summarize a long document, AI is going to be a much better source, right? But the students need to know how that works. So it's up to faculty to do assessment. And I think that's where I think our faculty are coming around to that it's no longer enough to just give a test. It's no longer enough just to assign a paper. We've really got to think about how do we assess learning. And when we assess learning, that means we need to change a little bit, right? And so I'm generally optimistic about what's going to happen. I don't think that AI is going to displace as many jobs as people are afraid of. I think it's going to change jobs dramatically. And I think in the future, the people who will, the person who will get a job is the person who knows how to use AI appropriately over the person who doesn't. And I think that's really going to be the future. But to be honest, I'm also a little grateful that while I'm not planning on retiring anytime soon, I can see it on the horizon, and by the time it's really gone crazy, I'll be retired and it'll be somebody else's problem.
Hey, so let's end on something totally different. You're from Texas, so yep. It's obvious, and I've seen your social media that you barbecue.
I do.
So,
yeah.
Give us a barbecue tip to take us home.
5 all the time. Put it on the smoker at 225 and leave it alone. All the Traeger and all the people online, you got to start it at 180 for 3 hours, and you got to do this. Just whatever you're smoking, put it at 225 and let it go. And when it gets to the temp you need, you'll be fine. And so if you're doing a steak, it might take a half hour. If you're doing a brisket, it might take you a day and a half. Who knows? So I've had briskets, go 22, 24 hours before they were done. It's it's kind of about being patient. So. If sauce is nice to have, but if you need sauce, there's something wrong with your barbecue.
Well, with that, Kevin, it's such a pleasure to have you on the Student Success podcast. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Al. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Student Success podcast. You can subscribe to the show and newsletter on the Continuous Learning Institute link below. And of course, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.